Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Joining me, as usual, on Tuesday, I would say as always, but Andrew Malcolm has been gold-breaking the last couple of weeks, but he is the prince of Twitter, the regent of Red State, nonetheless, and he's back. He's back. Andrew's back. Great to have you back.
Watch out. And this time he means business.
Yes, yeah. This is, was it Gandhi 2? He's back and he's pissed.
Naked gun, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sort of a naked gun.
Nothing to see here, folks. Move along.
So you were gone for a couple of weeks. I know that you were actually keeping your eye on the news because I would see you tweet things out and retweet things. And I'm thinking, Andrew, you're on vacation, man.
Yeah, I know. It's just impossible not to. But I was good to say sort of plugged in. I have to admit, Ed, I wasn't carrying a lot, but I was reading a lot.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're on vacation, you're not supposed to carry.
Now we're back at it. We can settle all these important issues of the day.
Well, we can, and I have to tell you, first off, you were missed. I mean, I miss my weekly talks with Andrew here on the podcast. But unfortunately, things kept percolating without you, and we certainly missed your rapier wit, shall we say?
Pithy comments.
Your pithy comments, and there's been a number of crises that have unfolded since you've been out, or that have kept unfolding, and one of which is the baby formula crisis. And you wrote about this in your VIP column. I want to talk about that, and I also want to talk about the Biden's address to the nation last Thursday on guns, which turned out to be a real backfire, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, let's talk about the baby formula stuff, because I think the baby formula press conference, I think, was Wednesday afternoon. And Dwayne and I discussed it last Thursday in the podcast. It was a disaster. I mean, I don't even understand what the White House was trying to accomplish by putting Joe Biden live on a conference call with a bunch of these CEOs who told them, we knew it was going to be a problem in February. Your FDA knew it was going to be a problem in February. Your HHS knew it was going to be a problem in February. We still don't know where you were at. And Biden was saying, well, I didn't know about it until April.
Yeah. And Raimundo, she said she didn't know about it till April.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, that shows what a amateur advance operation he has.
Right.
Or maybe he doesn't have one. It looks that way. But so somebody who's intelligent should have been talking in advance, one by one, to everybody who's going to be on the call and finding out what they were intending to say so that Biden could say yes. And that's a good point, and then add something of his own. But no, he didn't. He's flying by the seat of his pants because the guy has no intellect, and he is what the major theme of the column was on Sunday, a reactive president. He just reacts to things. There's no grand planning, there's no thinking ahead, anticipation, which, when I worked in government, it was state government, but when I worked in government, the governor told me, 75% of your job is avoiding potholes.
Yeah.
And that saves a lot of time and hassle. Also helps you get reelected. But if you look like you know what you're doing, people will cut you some slack because they don't know as much as you do. But unfortunately, Joe doesn't know hardly anything about what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that we've talked about this before, and Afghanistan really broke this presidency because it became very clear that Joe Biden had no idea what he's talking about, that he had no plan for dealing with his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. He contradicted himself, saying he would stick around to get all the Americans out, and there's 14,000 Americans left behind, not to mention tens of thousands of Afghan allies that he left behind. And from that moment on, and I argued at the time, this is going to be a.
You did.
Yeah. Yep. This is going to trigger a confidence crisis with Joe Biden, and it's it's continued for 10 months since then. And you can see it in the polling. It's just crashed. And, ABC, we can talk a little bit about the economy, I guess. ABC News has a poll out. As we're speaking, it would have been Sunday, yesterday, but by the time this comes out, 2 days ago, on the economy, showing that 80% of its respondents think that inflation is the priority issue for the election, and Joe Biden only gets 28% on dealing with the economy. 83% say inflation, by the way. But 80% say 80% say inflation, 83% say the economy, and Joe Biden gets 28% approval rating on that. Why? Not because we have a nation of economists, right? No. It's because A, they're living through the result of his policies, and B, it's clear he doesn't know what he's doing at all.
He doesn't have a clue. No, he doesn't. No contingencies, and as I said a minute ago, no advanced planning, no thinking things through. And what he did, when you mentioned Afghanistan, what he did was the general said, you need to keep 2,500 troops in Kabul or at Bagram so that we can protect and secure an evacuation. But he wanted to get the full withdrawal, all American troops are out. So we had all the American troops out. Now, the generals in the Pentagon, they knew trouble was coming because they assembled in the Middle East 8,000 troops ready to go back in. And so when the chaos erupted and everybody was stuck behind, they were ready. The military, thank you for them, the military was ready to respond when the president said, we need to send some people back in. And of course, being loyal servants, they didn't say, we told you so publicly, but they did. And he was such a klutz. And of course, afterwards, he declared this was a grand success.
Yeah.
George, we're going to stay until everyone who wants out gets out. But no. And you were right at the time, and you're right again now that he doesn't know what he's doing. And
it's obvious.
The perfect image of that is shaking hands with nobody. To me, that is the
right.
I mean, that's everything in a nutshell. The president of the United States pretending to shake hands with somebody that only he sees.
I think it's Harvey. I think it was Harvey.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, to get back to the topic of your column, which was, clueless and proud of it on baby formula. I mean, this to me was extremely avoidable. I mean, certainly there have been questions as to why Joe Biden hadn't responded to this. They were trying to say, well, he found out about it in April and he responded right away. Well, the first even mention of a response didn't come until mid-May, and even then it was this lame website, right, with a couple of phone numbers on it, where you could call the manufacturer.
Really work.
I mean, you could call them up and ask them, "Hey, where's the formula?" And they would say, "Damned if we know."
Yeah.
Oh,
Johnny on the spot. Remember that was the website for the Obamacare. Was a complete disaster.
Yeah.
This pair is.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good point. So a week after that, they invoked the Defense Production Act, which, by the way, they just invoked again today for a completely different reason. But the Defense Production Act to order more manufacturing of baby formula, when the issue isn't that the producers don't want to make it. The issue is the FDA shut down one of the facilities that made it. There's a big one, the Abbott one, and B, the federal government prohibits the importation of baby formula made in Europe. Not because it's unsafe. They know it's safe. It's that it doesn't have one. There's one data point not listed on the label, and the FDA won't allow that to be sold here without that data point. It's some arcane data point on the label. It's not even a safety issue. It's just a labeling issue. And we've got tariffs on Canadian stuff, which, by the way, those tariffs came from the USMCA. That was a trade agreement negotiated by the Trump administration. But if you're really on top of this, why aren't you waiving those tariffs? Why aren't you telling the FDA to waive the labeling requirements and allow those people to sell here?
screw the label, get the stuff in.
Right.
So what he's done, and the plant just opened this weekend, the big one.
It did, yes.
And Biden announced today, which is Monday, that another 1.6 million 8-ounce formula bottles are coming into Texas in the next few days from Nestle in Germany. So, and he's bragging that over 8 million of these equivalents have been brought in. But you know what that is, Ed? The United States, for the first time in its modern history, is getting foreign aid from Europe. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. And there's no of our watchdog media press corps, which is got all these constitutional protections, is not on the ball. I say, well, wait a minute. We are accepting foreign aid like a poor country because you screwed everything up.
Right. I mean, it's not even. If you lowered the tariffs, if you removed the at least temporarily removed the labeling requirements, it wouldn't be aid. They'd just be entering the marketplace, right? Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I suspect that there's one of the issues behind that might be the fact, and I don't mean to be too conspiratorial here, but if you do that, then the sales here are imports, and the imports would count against GDP because exports count towards GDP, imports count against GDP, and that's actually what happened in the first quarter of this year. Is, consumer spending was okay. It was, I think, the last estimate, I think from Q1 was like a 3.1% increase over the previous quarter, annualized, which is a decent level. But the exports were like off by double digits, and the imports were up by double digits, which is the reason why you ended up with a negative number on the GDP. And the more that you allow it to be imported when you're not producing domestically, the worse your GDP number is going to look. And I'm wondering, here's the thing. I'm wondering if that's what one of the issues is with just, waiving the tariffs. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can credit this White House with thinking that strategically. I'm not sure. I'm not sure anybody in that White House would actually have the brain cells to put that calculation together in the first place. They may just be dumb.
They're laughing out of pain.
Yeah.
The incompetence builds up by the day, almost daily. There's a new example of it, and nothing happens. Nobody moves to do anything about it. He doesn't apologize.
Yep.
I was just talking with somebody on Twitter yesterday, and we were discussing that this could be the plan of Biden's handlers, whomever they are, in the White House behind the scenes, that they want people to go, oh, that's just Joe, that we get so used to clumsiness and screw ups that we just kiss it off and go, oh, that's another one. But someday in the whatever it is, 900 days left in his administration, it's going to be a serious deal.
Yep.
I mean, he's sending more javelins over, which it takes 2 years to gear up and make more javelins to for our own guys. So he's before the latest shipment, Biden has sent over 1/3 of our javelin supply.
Yep.
Now we're not in an active war. On the other hand, he sent the 82nd Airborne to Poland because he thought there might be one. So once again, he's behind the curve. Afghanistan, remember the great celebration, mission accomplished last July 4th we beat COVID, except as you pointed out at the time, here comes Delta. So supply chain crisis in the fall. He had 2 photo ops and then declared it was fixed.
Yep.
but it's not. It's
Nope.
not. I just walked by the shelves in Walmart today. There's a whole bunch of shelves empty. You can't get a lot of stuff. And the inflation. I mean, that's just my son, who's in the military, buys a lot of his groceries at Sam's Club, and he went, and what a usual shopping trip that usually costs as much as 120 yesterday was 170.
Yeah.
Same stuff.
Yep.
And I'm on a fixed income, but so are people on salary.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can't go in and say, "Oh, well, everything costs more." Can't
Well,
do it.
well, you can, but
Yeah,
good luck
right.
with you. Good luck with you on that one. You can actually do
You can
that,
try,
but you can
yeah.
try. But yeah, look, I mean, I mean, yeah, it's just, I have a, I haven't voiced it yet, but I have an editorial piece coming up for Town Hall that talks about the fact that inflation's always a regressive tax,
Yeah.
and Joe Biden has done more to widen economic gaps than any president in the last 40 years.
Well,
And
he
out of
just
complete economic incompetence, complete
and he
incompetence.
completely and he just blithely skates right by it, and nobody blows the whistle on him. Yeah,
Well,
I mean, if
yeah,
they did, I don't know whether he'd understand it. But uh,
no,
remember, no. Well, remember when Peter Ducey asked him about how his people gave him 3 examples of how his people were walking stuff back, and Biden looked at him in the camera and just said, "It didn't happen."
yeah,
It's on videotape. What do you mean it didn't happen? And that he just walks away. It just you get away with it. There's no outcry. There's nothing. Are you leaving, Ed?
I am not leaving. I got a sudden phone call, but I will have to discuss it with the person afterwards. So because
Okay.
nothing stops the Tuesday
Nothing
podcast.
stops this, right?
Nothing
That's right.
stops this. You can't
I'm
stop the
outraged,
signal.
Ed. I'm outraged, and everybody should be outraged that this podcast was interrupted by an unscheduled phone call. Once again, you're not prepared.
I am not prepared. I feel like I'm just as reactive as Joe Biden when the phone rings. It's
I
almost like a
don't.
yeah whoop. Just
I
turn that
don't
head.
think.
Whoop.
I don't think so.
All
Yeah.
right. I want to ask you about something else. Now, you've been gone for a bit. You know, you're my go-to guy when it comes to the media stuff. Have you been watching what's been going on with the Washington Post over Dave Weigel's retweet of a stupid joke?
Wasn't that something?
You know, they suspended him today, apparently for a month.
They suspended him?
They suspended Dave Weigel for a month. Oliver Darcy from CNN is reporting on this. Washington Post has suspended Dave Weigel without pay for his retweet of a sexist joke. When emailed for comment, an out-of-office message said that he will return on July 5th. Now, it was a bad joke. I mean, it was in poor taste, and I mean, I'll tell you what the joke was. I'm sure that people are going to be outraged that I even am mouthing this joke. But you have to understand what the context of this is. It's not, you know, it wasn't the end of the world. It was a tasteless joke. It said all women are bi. You just have to figure out whether it's polar or sexual. Which is stupid. It's a stupid joke. It's not even really that funny. And he retweeted it. He didn't write the joke. He didn't push it out. He retweeted that was it. And then he deleted it because apparently, or at least he undid the retweet because apparently he thought better of it. And then his colleagues started calling him out on it on Twitter over it. Felicia Sonmez is the first one to do this. And then the whole Washington Post, it seems like the whole squad was on Twitter going to war with each other over this. And he already apologized. He undid the retweet. He'd apologized for it. I know Dave a little. You know, I've met him at the conferences and we've chatted from time to time. And you know, he's a center left kind of guy. He's not a caveman, right? He's kind of a little bit far away from it. Then he's a younger guy. I don't know what his age actually is. He's younger than I am, which means that, of course, everybody's younger than me. Yeah.
Yeah. Not me, but everybody else.
Everybody else other than you is younger than me. So maybe that doesn't count for anything. But he's not a bad guy, you know. He's a very mild guy. He's a very mild-mannered guy. He's on Twitter, he's a lot more snarky, I think, than he is in real life. And just like everybody else, sometimes I get you in trouble. Gets me in trouble from time to time. Gets everybody in trouble from time to time. It's hardly a canceling offense to have simply
Yeah.
retweeted and then undo the retweet of a really stupid joke. And
Yeah.
I mean,
That's where we are today. Is everybody is outraged by anything, and it's. I mean, life is too short for that. I'm afraid. So
it really is. I mean, I don't even understand why and this is sort of a piece of what happened at Ilya Shapiro, right, at Georgetown Law. I don't know if you caught up with that this morning.
and the op-ed people at the New York Times, James Bennett and
Yeah,
those last year when they, or was it last year, or the year before when they published Tom Cotton's op-ed.
a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was 2 years ago. That's right. When he suggested the army might be brought in, which, okay, a Democrat is not going to do what a Republican suggested, but that's not the end of the world. And Bennett and his helper, who was supposed to diversify the opinion on the page, who was now on Substack. Her name escapes me at the moment, but
Barry Weiss.
yeah, Barry Weiss. That so they were diversifying the content, and turns out I used to work for Dean Baquet. Uh, they were, they didn't like it, but they weren't all that outraged about it, except the staff blew up
Yeah.
and drove the editors to get them fired, which sounds like what's happening on the Washington Post, except it's suspension instead of firing.
Well, it's suspension for now. I mean, honestly, is a suspension enough? If is he still going to be problematic when he returns? I mean, this is. Yeah, I think the stuff at the New York Times is a great analogy for this, because they chased off an op-ed editor who made the career mistake of allowing a sitting United States senator to publish his opinion in the pages. I mean, honestly, I would actually allow, I'd actually encourage Tom Cotton to post an op-ed with us. We've done it before. We've had sitting House members and senators do guest posts. It's really the only context in which we allow guest posts is to allow, for sitting office holders to do that. That's just advancing the debate. But here's the issue: it's no longer advancing the debate, and this is why I want to tie it back to what's happening with what happened to Ilya Shapiro at Georgetown Law, right? And Ilya Shapiro, also a tweet, right? This is before he started working at Georgetown Law. Tweeted something about Ketanji Brown Jackson, which he admitted was crafted inartfully, and he deleted it and apologized for it, right? After that, and after he was hired at Georgetown Law, the screen cap of that was passed around campus, and people on campus started screaming about how he's going to create a hostile environment at Georgetown Law, and he has to be drummed out. And Georgetown Law does this months-long investigation of a tweet that was written before they even offered him the job, right? Which it was tweeted and deleted before they even offered him the job. And they finally came to the conclusion last week, I think it was, that he tweeted it before he came on the job, so it wasn't really under their jurisdiction, which was stupid enough. But then apparently they told him, if you do something like that while you're here, then you're going to have problems. And that's the reason why Shapiro quit today. Said, take this job and shove it. You're basically setting up a heckler's veto in which anybody who's offended by anything dictates all the outcomes. And you can't that is not free speech.
And it's guaranteed that there will be.
Oh, God, yeah. Because they're encouraging it. They're actively encouraging that. The Washington Post is actively encouraging this. The New York Times editors are actively encouraging this kind of crap, and they're getting it.
Yep. Oh. The only way that this is going to get undone, I think, is market forces. Yeah. New York Times is having a really good year with subscriptions, online subscriptions anyway. I don't know about the Washington Post, but
well, I got to tell you, I think Netflix had the right attitude towards this.
Yeah.
For a while they were tolerating this nonsense from their employees, and then was it a couple of weeks ago they signed up Dave Chappelle for some more specials, and said, here's the thing. We're in favor of free speech. If you don't seem to like that, you can find someplace else to work. Now they put it in much nicer terms, right? But basically,
you're free. Free speech. If you don't like free speech, you're free to go somewhere else.
Right, you're free to work someplace else that will fit you, that will fit your worldview much better. But we're going to do free speech here, and I am astounded that the Washington Post and the New York Times and now Georgetown Law, all of whom operate in some form or another in the free speech realm, either academic free speech or free speech in the media, all keep caving on this point. They still haven't learned this lesson that that editors exist to make sure that stuff like this doesn't happen. I mean, God forbid I ever become managing editor of any of those publications, because I think half the staff would quit and I'd fire the other half.
Yeah. I don't understand. It seems like so much of what's going on in the country today is upside down, and there's really no explanation for it if you're not woke.
Yeah.
Which to me is a glass premise that, you're jumping up and down on a glass premise. It's going to collapse at some point. Making major decisions, career decisions. And it's so embarrassing for, I think, majority of Americans. They're never going to subscribe to the Washington Post, but it certainly hurts their image, and their image was pretty strong after Watergate.
Yeah. And because of the reporting that they did. Although there was really interesting article I read, I think it was over the weekend, about how the Washington Post sort of over promotes their role in this. And there was actually a lot of really good reporting, much of which came from other newspapers, including the New York Times, which sort of started eating their lunch before they reassigned it back to the Post. The Post decided to put Woodward and Bernstein back on the case because they'd been assigned off of it to other things.
I'd forgotten that part, but I do recall the panic on the New York Times every night when they would get the first edition of Washington Post to see how they'd been snockered that day. And then they were running around for the second edition to try to get a matcher for it, a matching story.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, yes, I mean, that happens. That's just, editors make decisions about priorities, and sometimes it doesn't work out. I mean, I under the circumstances
but they still stay editors.
Yeah. Everybody fails upwards now. Everybody fails upwards.
That's right.
Including the idiots at the Washington Post.
The New York Times is changing editors, not because of any scandal that I know of. This in the middle of this month.
Yep, that's true.
Bringing a new guy in. I have to say, I worked for Dean Baquet for some years, and he was an excellent boss and had very good sound journalism suggestions for me of what I might cover, and then he'd leave me alone. He'd give me the assignment and then goodbye. So I don't understand, and I'm not sure it's worth trying to understand, but I don't understand how he got so bullied by the staff. But I guess that's a measure of how toxic the woke work environment has become.
I think so, and I think the Washington Post is putting it on display. I mean, this thing's been a tantrum on social media for several days now, and this is certainly not going to help them look any smarter. And frankly, Dave's a pretty good reporter, and I think sidelining him is cutting off their nose to spite their face. But hey,
but you gotta buy the angry people off somehow.
And as we're discussing this, I have to I gotta say this. Red Steez, whose name is Stephen Miller, not the same Stephen Miller that was in the Trump White House, but Red Steez, who's pretty well known on Twitter, retweeted out, or not didn't retweet, he actually rewrote the joke that got Dave Weigel suspended. I am not going to fall for that one. I'm not retweeting that, but because I still think it's a stupid joke, but it's very clearly he's being provocative. We'll let him be provocative.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So AG Hamilton 29, who is a well-known commenter, says leaking emails from your boss, okay. Publicly smearing colleagues is sexist, okay. Getting others to harass colleagues, okay. Filing baseless lawsuits against your employer, okay. Lying about contacting subjects for an article, okay. Retweeting a silly joke, suspension.
Oh, it's so painful.
It is so painful. It is so bad. They spent 2 days correcting that Taylor Lorenz article on where she claimed to have reached out to comment from a couple of internet commentators, and she never did. And they've spent 2 days. They spent 2 or 3 days trying to recraft a correction to that article, and she's still employed, even though she materially misrepresented what she was doing in that article. Not for the first time, by the way. But Dave Weigel gets a month off or 2 weeks off, whatever it is, without pay, because he RT'd a stupid joke. Yeah, I guess they don't. I guess, in terms of stupid jokes, the Washington Post really just doesn't want the competition.
They just think, well, remember, Ed, democracy dies in darkness. Oh, wait.
Yeah, exactly. We're actually past the end of our half hour, and I still haven't gotten the jokes of the day. Now, you can't include the Washington Post because we've already covered the Washington Post.
Okay,
I'm just going to tell you that right now.
All right. Well, I got a Leno. These are all old ones.
Okay.
Because I'm not getting the new ones. But Leno Replay, President Obama met with Queen Elizabeth in London, and she suggested returning to pre-1776 borders. That was timely at the time. And you remember when President went to Colombia? I've forgotten which president this was, but so Jay Leno Replay, he says 4 of the Secret Service agents fired over the Colombian sex scandal say they did not know the women they took to their hotel rooms were prostitutes. Really? Guys who watch crowds for a living.
I think that was Obama. I mean, it's no reflection on Obama because this is the Secret Service's problem, not Obama's problem. But I believe it was President Obama who was visiting Colombia when because I think I was writing for Hot Air at the time. Yeah, it was. Yeah. That was embarrassing.
Yeah. And finally, Jay Letterman, he says, a replay, he says, the guy who invented the TV remote died this weekend, and with him went the secret of what the hell the SAP button is for.
I'll tell you, I'm so old. I remember when the remote control was attached to a big thick cable that went to the back end of a television, and you press these buttons and it went cha-chunk, cha-chunk, cha-chunk,
yeah, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. Yeah, I remember when the TV remote was me. Okay, go change it to channel 4.
Yeah, I was my dad's remote control. Yeah, for quite a while, I was my dad's remote control. Yeah, but that was my great grandparents. They had this television. They had this really marvelous remote control, and every time I was over there, I'd want to play with it. And my I don't have too many memories of my great grandfather, but the one I do is him basically tolerating me playing with his remote control like it was a toy,
switching back and forth.
I'm sure he was going. He's Italian, so I'm sure he was muttering something under his breath in Italian while his great grandson was doing that. But funny. God bless him.
Well, the first thing, we got the TV late. Well, first of all, I remember part of a childhood without TV, and then when the TV came, I had rules, and that was I couldn't watch until 5:30. So I had to play outside with people until 5:30, which coincidentally was when Howdy Doody came on. And years later, I got excited because I was interviewing Buffalo Bob. How about that?
That's kind of cool.
The first TV we had was 12-inch Dumont. It was about this big. Yeah, and the test pattern and the national anthem at the beginning and the end of the day.
Yep.
I tell you what.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my parents used to tell me to go outside and play in the street too, and that not to accept a ride home from a stranger unless they offered me candy first. So, I'm not sure what that says about my. No, that's not true. I'm
Well,
kidding. Please don't suspend me like Dave Weigel
yeah,
for
you
over
play
that joke.
outside and you have to come in when the street lights come on.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, exactly. Or when the neighbor lady starts screaming down the block for her kids.
Well, and yeah, and in those days, everybody was a parent.
Right.
I mean, if we were playing tag or capture the flag or something and running through everybody's yards, someone would come out and say, "Stop that," and we had to obey them. If somebody did that today, some angry father would go, "What are you doing? Telling my son that it's things have changed."
Things have indeed changed. But you know what doesn't change? Andrew's here every Tuesday, except when he's
Yep.
goldbricking.
Except when I'm
Except,
knocking off.
except
Yeah.
when you're goldbricking. Andrew's here every Tuesday. The Prince of Twitter at Malcolm on Twitter. The Regent of Red State, redstate.com. Go check that out. Andrew, thanks so much for being here. We'll talk to you again next week.
Okay, Ed. Thank you, and thanks everybody. We'll see you then.
We'll see you then, and stay tuned for more from the Ed Morrissey Show. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com for Town Hall. The rich may not be getting much richer in this massive inflationary wave, but the working class is most certainly getting poorer. The Associated Press and the Washington Post have both acknowledged that Joe Biden's inflation has created an economy of haves and have-nots. While the White House continues to spin consumer spending statistics, the spending patterns show increasing stratification. Wealthy households have continued to spend on luxuries, but working class Americans have been forced to look for cheaper alternatives to staples in food and clothing, or go without. Big box retailers have had to recalculate their projections as low-income households suffer most from the erosion of their buying power. We already knew that higher inflation levels act as a regressive tax. The latest economic data demonstrate that effect, and it also delivers a warning. The middle class is next, and in fact is already starting to adjust purchasing decisions in light of higher prices. Joe Biden has done more to widen economic gaps than any president in the last 40 years. I'm Ed Morrissey. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast edition. Joining me, my friend Brant Hadaway, who is the lead attorney on the MaskMandate challenge in Florida. I should say Florida. I might talk about California in a second, Brant, but he is the lead attorney on the challenge out of Florida that knocked out the CDC's travel mask mandate. We thought that might just be dead, that the Biden administration might say, better to quit while you're behind. But apparently, apparently they don't appreciate the joys of being behind. They are challenging. They're appealing that decision in Florida. Brant, you were expecting this. I mean, we talked about it at the time, and you were saying, no, come on, they're going to appeal.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that they appealed, but they didn't seek a stay of the trial court's ruling. So they sort of get to have it both ways. They don't have to take the political fallout of kind of yanking back the mask mandate and putting everybody back in masks, because I think once you saw all those videos go viral on Twitter of people, of all the happy faces of people taking off their masks, that was kind of a Rubicon that can't be recrossed. But they're concerned about the institutional authority to do this or something like it in the future. So that's what this appeal is about.
Well, there's really two tracks we can discuss with this, and this is the reason why California might come up into the conversation, is because California's thinking about reimposing some mask mandates at the state level. Now, that's a different issue than what Brant is arguing. Legally, it's a different issue, but substantively, it's the same problem, which is that mask mandates don't really work. David Leonhardt had a long piece, I think it was on Thursday or Friday of last week. I ended up quoting it again today, which demonstrated that all the studies have shown that there's no outcome difference between, I don't want to say municipalities, but governmental levels that required mask mandates and governments that didn't. And we've got plenty of data now on this. And it's very clear that mask mandates don't have a statistically significant impact. In fact, there's some indications that places that had mask mandates had actually higher levels of transmission than places that didn't. And there may be various different reasons for that. But clearly there was no substantive positive impact from having mask mandates. That's the rational basis. And that's part of, I'm sure, what's going to come up in the appeal too. But really your appeal, or excuse me, not your appeal, your lawsuit was actually based on the law as well as the rational outcomes of this. In fact, more so, I would say. And on that, you're on solid ground too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem for them because, you can say, you can come up with a study where they use mannequins that had masks on and emitting, spittle or whatever at each other. And you can say, well, a laboratory test shows that these masks trap the water droplets and therefore masks work. That's not a real world test. That doesn't measure how things work in the real world. It doesn't measure how people interact. And especially with the CDC mask mandate, to say things, well, this appears to work on a micro level in the lab, there's absolutely no evidence that it worked on a macro level whatsoever. And one of the things we showed in the trial court below is we simply pulled up the CDC's own statistics, its own data from its COVID tracker website, and showed how the waves went through all 10 HHS regions without regard to when the mandate was instituted. And so there's just no data out there to show that this actually works on a community level.
Yeah, Brent, I mean, I'm sure you read Leonhardt's analysis on Thursday, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, it's not the first time he's written this. I mean,
no.
He's actually one of the better reporters on this. I can't remember the woman's name who's also a reporter at the New York Times, who's a poor something. She's really good too. She's done a lot of really good work on this as well.
Mm-hmm.
For people who complain about the New York Times, their editorial policies stink, and some of their news is clearly tilted. But but there are people at the New York Times who actually do good work, and I would argue that Leonhardt's one of them. And and he was making the same exact point you were making, which was that there's laboratory tests that show that masking works as long as it's precise and exact. Yeah, there's some evidence that masking will work. But there's no evidence that shows that in practice, when it's implemented as a mandate, that it does anything to impact transmission, hospital admissions, or deaths. And so that is, I mean, that speaks to rational basis. Tell us a little bit about the law, though. And I think that this is the more important piece when it comes to the CDC.
Right. Well, again, this was a challenge under the Administrative Procedure Act, which allows you to challenge agency rulemaking on a number of grounds. And the three grounds we raised were lack of or in excess of statutory authority, first.
Right.
Second, failure to allow notice and comment, and there was no rationale for not allowing notice and comment. And third was that the rule was arbitrary and capricious. Either it was unreasonable or not reasonably explained. So this was not like a Scopes monkey trial on mask efficacy, but just simply to look at the internal reasoning of the CDC and to say it didn't make sense.
Right. And this is a similar basis as to how the CDC's edicts on evictions got tossed. Now, that wasn't your case, but right. I mean, you certainly relied on the Supreme Court's decision in that case, which was to say
Mhm.
that Congress didn't grant the CDC any statutory authority to issue eviction moratoria, and
Right.
they haven't done so. They haven't granted statutory authority for the CDC to intervene in international or national and international travel either. And so Congress can certainly
Mhm.
grant them that statutory authority, but until they
Right.
do, the CDC can't issue these mask mandates.
Right. And there's sort of a, there's this under the statute that the CDC relied on. Uh, the Supreme Court and the eviction moratorium case found that it was constrained by this sort of enumeration of provisions, and lower courts have said that that provision is really about property interests. It doesn't really give the CDC any license to regulate individual human conduct.
Right.
And so that's part of the issue. Not just, there was a lot of big kerfuffle about the definition of the word sanitation and to the extent to which, it can be defined to encompass preventative measures, which the trial court found that it didn't seem to work based on the surrounding language. But it's, beyond that, there's the issue of, what category of things or people is this statute intended to govern? Because there's a completely different subsection that covers interstate and international quarantine. Excuse me. And those powers are separately delineated in the statute and under the regulations. And there's just no precedent for the CDC reaching out and regulating the conduct of tens of millions of individuals like this.
Right. And again, that's what the district court in Florida found as well in joining the CDC's mask mandate. Now, your client in this was Health Freedom Defense Fund, and we had Leslie Manoukian on with you the last time. She couldn't make it this time, but I don't want to leave her out of the conversation, right? Because she's an integral part of this challenge, and you can find more about that, by the way, at healthfreedomdefense.org. So remember that, healthfreedomdefense.org. And Leslie, we all say hi to you. Sorry you couldn't make it today, but we'll get you on. We'll get you on soon.
Send your regards.
We do. And look, I mean, I'm assuming because I remember when we spoke the last time, she was very enthusiastic about pursuing this all the way to the Supreme Court if that's what was necessary. So I'm assuming A, she's just as enthusiastic as the last time we spoke, and B, that well, I guess I'll say A, but I'll ask B. Was she surprised that she's going to have to pursue this all the way to the Supreme Court? Because honestly, I am still a little surprised that the Biden administration isn't just quitting while it's actually ahead because it doesn't have to enforce this very unpopular mandate any longer.
Right. I mean, she's ready to go. If we have, if that's where we have to end up, I mean, that's where we'll end up. But we'll see. There are no guarantees. The Supreme Court's jurisdiction is discretionary, as you know, right. And they're not required to take up anything. So it's too early to say whether it's actually going to go that far, but it could. And if it does, we're ready.
Well, I think that it's very likely that you're going to prevail on appeal just because of the issues with the eviction moratorium and how closely this parallels that. So just to walk everybody through that, one Supreme Court just generally doesn't necessarily take up cases like this if A, it's already mostly ruled on the exact same issue, and B, there isn't what's called a circuit split where you have conflicting resolutions in two different districts. So assuming that the appeals court upholds this, my guess, upholds the original ruling, my guess is that the White House will probably try to appeal it, but the Supreme Court might just say, been there, done that.
Right. Right. I mean, they might. And there are, there's an additional issue that the administration is raising beyond the statutory interpretation and the APA issues, and that is the scope of the relief that the trial court granted. They're very let's say exercised over over that. And they liken it to a nationwide injunction, which all I can say is, well, welcome to the club, Democrats. Now you're
Right.
against nationwide injunctions. Okay. But this really doesn't easily fit into that category. I mean, you have an Article 3 court ruling on the legality of an agency rule. And once you sort of cross that Rubicon, how do you come back? And what's the remedy for that? Once you've gone beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. And I think that if you have a state that's challenging some sort of agency rule and a district court rules for a state, I guess you can say that, technically speaking, maybe that should only apply to a state unless other states join in. And then if it gets to an appeals court, then it's really only precedential for the jurisdiction of that particular appeals court. But when you have a private organization challenging an agency rule that's applied nationwide, and a federal judge rules that it violates the law and it exceeds the agency's jurisdiction, I mean, there's really no limiting factor on that. They can't enforce that anywhere once a judge has ruled on that. That's not even really and this isn't really even a stay, right? I mean, this was a ruling on the merits of this case.
It was, and the other sort of thing that's out there is the government is now trying to say that the remedy should have been limited to the 5 individual plaintiffs that were before the court and not to the nationwide membership of Health Freedom Defense Fund. And that is, well, that's an interesting conundrum for them, because the left has fought for organizational standing for decades and has set numerous precedents on this. But okay, now you're going to say that organizations don't have standing to seek relief on behalf of their members. What's the limiting principle there?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fascinating case for a lot of different reasons, right? I mean, it just is, and it's going to behoove us to stay tuned on this, and we're going to. But again, I know that you're the lead attorney on this, and so we want to make sure that we get to all the legal points. But man, you're Brant Hadaway. You used to write the Strange Women Lying in Ponds blog. I got to get to the politics. I got to get to the fun stuff here on this.
Right.
I'm gonna make sure every time Brant comes on, I'm gonna make sure that was a great blog. I love that blog.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't renew the URL, and somebody in India bought it, and so it was. Oh well. Anyway.
Oh, that's too bad. That's too bad.
Yeah.
Do you still have the archives?
No, I just
that's
I didn't. Well, I was trying to focus on my legal career, and I just realized I didn't have the energy for it. But I kind of regret it. But
that's all right.
Maybe I'll get back to it.
It lives on in our memory, and if you do get back to it, even more the better.
Yeah.
But to get to the politics of this, I mean,
yes,
California is having a primary tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in California, it's an open primary. They don't have party primaries. It's one primary for everybody, and just the top 2 finishers go on to the general election, except if one person in the primary gets more than 50% plus 1 vote, then they just win outright. So over the weekend, just as and there's been early voting going on in California, by the way, for at least a couple of weeks. So I mean, a lot of people have already voted on this by this time. But I mean, Tuesday is the big in-person voting day. If you haven't done it by mail, you can go to a voting station and cast your ballot in person. Just a few days before this, California let it be known that they're thinking about reimposing a bunch of mask mandates up and down the state because hospital admissions are going way up and transmissions going way up. And at the same time, I'm reading over in the Hill that people really don't care. They've been vaccinated. There's therapeutics. They've been exposed to this probably multiple times in various different ways. And people are just ready to just live their lives without having these, extraordinary government interventions. Now, With it being said that a state level mask mandate is a different kettle of fish than a CDC imposed mask mandate on travel. And it is. It just is. There's more legal room for states to do that, especially if they're working with legislatures. I mean, how stupid is it, politically speaking, for California's leadership to be pressing in again on a mask mandate? And I'll get to the data on that in just a second. But just in principle, how stupid is it to do that at the same time where people around the country are sick and tired of this? I'm assuming in California, which had mask mandates for a lot longer than a lot of other places did.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you get in a state with one party rule.
Yeah.
And they've had one party rule there for so long that there's no real pushback on so many things, and not just this. I have another case that's actually against the Los Angeles Unified School District, and I was looking to schedule some depositions, and the lead attorney for LAUSD said, "Oh, I don't suppose you and your clients would be willing to wear masks, would you?" And I said, "Does LA still have a mask mandate? I mean, that's been over here for a long time." "Well, our law office does."
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I mean, the first point you make about people are so over it. I mean, if you look at the data on clinical outcomes, it's a very different situation from what it was, 2 years ago, even a year and a half ago. I mean, so many people have been exposed, and the symptoms are mild, and ICU admissions are still relatively low, and there are very few hospitals or health systems that are actually telling us, how many of these hospitalizations are people with COVID and without COVID. I think during the Omicron wave, one of the major hospitals here in Miami-Dade County was reporting that every day, and it was between 60 to 65% of all of the hospitalizations were incidental cases. They're just people who had been admitted for something else, and they tested positive for COVID.
Well, this was part of my point today. First off, the LA Times is saying, well, they're ramping it up because hospital admissions are really increasing rapidly. Well, if you take a look at the CDC's own data on this, because you can break it out by state, hospital admissions, you have to dig around a bit, but you can find it, and you can find the historical data on it. It's at 7-day rolling average of 345 hospital admissions a day of people who have COVID diagnoses. Now, that's correlative because the CDC still does not require hospitals or county officials to report causative admissions or deaths, right? Yeah. So when you have a variant as transmissible as Omicron and the subvariants of Omicron, it's going to spread rapidly. So there's going to be a lot of people going into the hospital who have been exposed to it and can be diagnosed with it, but it has nothing to do with their hospital admission, and it also has nothing to do with their death. And even with that, even if you wanted to just say, well, okay, we're going to compare apples to apples, we got to go correlative because we've been going correlative all along. That's fine and dandy, except it's only still about 1/8 of the peak that we had in January. And even then in California, I mean, I'm just talking about California, although that was true nationwide as well. Even then in California, nobody was saying that ICUs were running out of resources, that hospitals were running out of resources. Why? Because most of those, the hospitals weren't treating COVID-19. They were treating other symptoms. These are people who would have been hospitalized anyway, or people who would have died anyway. And so you come back around again to the idea that you've got bad data on admissions. You've got bad data on deaths. You probably got good data on cases, except that it's probably underestimating it because people who don't have symptoms aren't getting themselves tested. And that's also another reason why you don't really need to worry about this too much. You've got vaccines, you've got therapeutics, you have very few bad outcomes from this any longer. And yet you still have governments, including the federal government, including the CDC, that are insisting that they have to keep the power to enforce mask mandates in order to manage a public health crisis that honestly really appears to have largely passed. Yeah, exactly. And, part of the political dynamic that's at work here is just the mindset of the
sort of bureaucratic mindset, which is to be so focused on a single data point. COVID cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. That's 3 data points, but within the sort of rubric of just looking at COVID, to the exclusion of everything else. And that's a terrible mistake that's been made from the very beginning of this pandemic, is that the obsession, and I think it's appealing to a sort of a neurotic sort of undercurrent in our current politics, to focus on this data to the exclusion of every other thing that goes into a person's well-being, health-wise, mental-wise, and fulfillment-wise. These are all things that do affect public health, but the fact that they've been neglected or outright ignored, or is something we're going to be paying for a long time.
Well, and the other thing too is that it also ignores something that David Leonhardt points out, which is that if you really want to be, if you really want to be doing something to protect yourself, you can just wear a mask on your own, because the same studies that show that double masking works in terms of 2 parties having masks on show that you can get the same benefit if only one party has a mask on, as long as they're wearing it correctly and they're wearing the correct mask. You don't have to have everybody else masked up. So if you want to fly with a mask on, nobody's telling you can't.
Right. Exactly. And if you're that worried about your health, you should really be talking to your doctor before traveling anyway. I mean, that's something I would do. Just, I know people who are immunocompromised. They've always had, that concern in the background. And so, they are really cautious about traveling. But that's just, that's something you should be doing anyway.
Well, and my wife is immunocompromised. We've talked about this quite a bit. She hates wearing a mask on the airplanes,
right?
And she says, I might do it maybe, if it was my choice, but I hate being told I've got to do it. And we came down to Texas about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago now, from Minnesota, where they still had some mask mandates in place. And, there's still some places here, where the private owners of the property require masks, mostly now just, health providers. And where I'm probably more likely to want to wear a mask anyway, just because I don't know who else is in the waiting room. And I'm not really worried about COVID as much as I might be worried about some other things. But I mean, it was very open down here. It was very relaxed. I'd say a year ago, I'd see 30 to 40% of the people wearing masks anyway, even without, and nobody's hassling them. If you want to wear a mask, great. It's down to probably like 5 to 10% now, but you still see people wearing masks down here. And everybody seems to be just fine with that.
Yeah. The saddest thing I see here in the South Florida heat are those people who are out on the street, on the sidewalk, all by themselves, wearing a mask or double mask. And the thing that occurs to me is that that's a person who has either been so frightened into a sort of irrational behavior, or it's just pure virtue signaling. There's absolutely zero rationality to it. But that's sort of part of the problem we've had with all this, is that you're suddenly telling, the whole population to start using medical devices that they have no training in, and they have no real guidance on what works and what doesn't, and why it works and why it doesn't, and what circumstances it can work. Even assuming that a mask can protect you from viral particles, and that's a highly controversial proposition itself. There's so many wild card factors out there in terms of just the way people behave, and that that's part of the big problem with these mandates.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's one of the things that we're going to be looking at too, in terms of. I'm going to be curious to see if on appeal the courts actually delve into the substantive issues on this, or whether they're going to Whether they're just going to say, look, I mean, we can settle this based on the fact that the CCC simply doesn't have the statutory, and we don't want to get into the rest of this. We're just going to sell it on basis of the statute, and that's it. You'll be fine with that if that's what they do, of course, Brant. But yeah.
I think there was another thing that the trial court didn't touch on, but it's a legal issue that we intend to emphasize as well, is that the CDC didn't even follow its own internal regulations when it instituted this mandate, which the 11th Circuit has said in the past, if an agency doesn't adhere to its own regulations in promulgating a rule, it has to be stricken down as arbitrary and capricious.
Yep. So that will definitely be something to keep an eye on as well. We've probably abused your time long enough here, Brant. But where can people go to find out more, to help out? Whatever they can do. I'm not sure if you've got anything set up for that, but I know you can go to healthfreedomdefense.org is one place to go. Is there any other places?
Well, I don't have a Venmo set up, but no, I'm kidding. The healthfreedomdefense.org. If you want to make a contribution to the effort, that's where you want to go. If you want to learn more about the cases, you can browse the page. There are links to the cases we're working on, and this particular ruling you can find. If you want to follow the case on Twitter, you can just look me up. Brant Hadaway is my handle on Twitter, and I'll be reporting on developments. I don't publicly comment on works in progress, so I'm not going to make any public comments on the government's briefs or any of the amicus briefs that are coming in until we have a ruling. But I'll be generally keeping people updated on what's going on.
Well, I hope you'll be coming back here and keeping us updated on what's going on, Brant, because it's a fascinating case, and we are certainly interested in seeing this one all the way through. Brant Hadaway, what's your law firm again?
The Davalier Law Group. That's Davalier, DAVILLIER lawgroup.com. I'm of counsel with them, and they're based out of New Orleans, funny enough. And I'm sort of their Miami outpost.
Well, that's not a bad outpost to have, right? I mean, it could be Anchorage.
Yeah, it could be Anchorage, except, oh man, if you'd been here on Saturday, oof. This is the time of year when it's just, well.
Yeah, we're in the hundreds here this week in Central Texas. So we'll be there for probably the next 6 to 8 weeks. It's a little drier here though than it is in Miami,
yeah.
So it's a little bit different.
Indeed. Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, man.
Well, thanks, Brant. Brant Hadaway, thanks so much for being with us. Stay tuned for more coming up from the Ed Morrissey Show. Thanks for tuning in to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast edition. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe at each of the different platforms. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Rumble, we're on YouTube, and we're at the Town Hall Media Player. So be sure to subscribe. Subscriptions are important. Really do appreciate that. It's free. Be sure to like the video if you like that as well. We want to get the word out as much as we possibly can. Really want to thank you for being with us. And while you're at it, if you're at any one of the Town Hall websites, especially hotair.com, be sure to subscribe to our VIP program, or our VIP Gold program, which has extra benefits for our subscribers. That is a paid subscription service, but that money goes to fund important initiatives such as Julio Rosas's on-the-road journalism, first-person journalism, journalism you can trust from the border, from the unrest in cities, and all other sorts of things. We do all sorts of fun things with our VIP Gold subscription members, including our VIP Gold chat that I do with Cam Edwards on Wednesday afternoons. Cam Edwards from BearingArms.com. Each of our sites have their own live chat editions and their own streaming shows for VIP Gold members. So be sure to subscribe to the Hot Air VIP Gold, which goes across the entire Town Hall media spectrum, and especially to the Ed Morrissey Show podcasts. We really appreciate it. Thank you for watching.